Welcome to my parlor. I'm Priscilla Andrews with Prairie Parlor, and today I'm bringing you a tutorial in conjunction with tinypandora.com.
Here's what we will be making today. Glittered coasters with totally new transfers from tinypandora.com. And here's the supplies you will need. Okay, let's get started. To begin with, I took some scrap clay and I rolled it out on a number 2 setting, and then I doubled it. So I have 2 layers of scrap clay on a number 2 setting, and I cut them into 4 by 4 inch squares. Then I baked them at the recommended temperature, which was 275, and I baked them for 30 minutes. And I now have 4 partially, mostly baked coaster blanks. I baked them in between 2 baking pans, so I had a little weight on the top so that they wouldn't warp or anything. Next, I took 1/4 of this 12.5 ounce bar of Kato white. It's on the side here somewhere. White. Again, use 1 bar. And I took 1 bar of Kato translucent. My tiles are baked, and I removed this one and found that I had a bubble, so there's more on the transfer still. You can do one of 2 things. You can rebake it, line it up very carefully, and bake it again to see if that comes off. Or, as I'm going to do, I have ultra fine point markers. These are ultra fine point Sharpies, and I am actually going to use this Sharpie, and I'm going to just kind of draw the pattern in roughly, because when we do to these what we're going to do next, you will see that you're not really going to see that part very well. I wanted to reiterate on these transfers that when you peel them off, there is going to be a little bit on the transfer sheet. And remember to put those dull side down. And that doesn't matter. You have your design here. And don't worry about that mark that we used to center it, because that's not going to be seen later anyway. Here's one I haven't peeled off yet. So I am going to do the big reveal. And I'm not worrying about it lifting off any of this either, because we're going to address that later. But you want them to cool completely and then slowly take the transfer off. And again, I had some bubbles where I didn't get it, but I'm not too worried about that. The main design is there. What I have here is some sandpaper, and I'm using 120 grit. This is why I said don't worry about the irregularities that you might have on there, because we're going to incorporate those into our design. So I take the sandpaper, and getting as close as I can to the design, I am just going to scratch it up. And the reason for this is that we're going to stain it. and we want it to look aged or at least used and a little more interesting than just a flat white surface. Now, you can sand it in any direction you want to. I tend to go in every direction. Now I'm going to take a look at this and see if I have some decent texture in there. I'm brushing this off. And I've made some marks that are going to complement the areas that we might not have gotten a perfect surface. I have protected my work surface with some premium heavy-duty wax paper or deli paper that I get at a discount wholesale house. And now we're going to stain it. In my stain, I use about 9 parts water or 10 parts water, depending on what you're doing, with 1 part of black acrylic paint. So I have that here in my bottle. Give it a few shakes. And we're going to take a stiff bristled brush, and I'm going to start painting those areas that I want stained. Being careful not to get up to the design too closely. And if you want to, after you do the big areas like this, you can use a smaller brush to get in closer. If you do get some paint on that, don't worry, wipe it off and start over, because this is actually the appearance of the background that we want is going to be white with a black stain. Okay, we are back and our stain has dried. You can see all the imperfections in there, and they're just not going to matter, because what we're going to be doing is taking 320 wet dry sandpaper, and we are going to be sanding this black off. And I'm going to be sanding it as little or as much as you want, and I'll show you in a minute what I mean. So just take your sandpaper, and I start in around the design here. And the paint, if it's a little thick when you put it on, which is okay, but what it does is it kind of rolls up like that, and your sandpaper just gets a little clogged up, so you can just take and wipe that off. But what we're going to do is just go around and we're going to sand it like that. So we're going to sand that off until you get to the look that you want on your coaster. Do not worry about the edges. You naturally end up sanding most of it off of the edges, but we're going to be dealing with that later too. So for now, sand off as much or as little as you want. The nice thing about this is you can always, if you sand it off too much, you can go back with your 120 sandpaper and just scratch it up and then stain it again and start all over. Okay, we have our tile here, and our tile is about ready for the next step. But first, when I talked about these edges getting a little white when you sanded, the first thing we're going to do is again take our stain, and I just have my paintbrush a little bit wet, and I'm just going to go around the edge, and I see I have mostly water and not much stain, so just give me a minute to drop some stain on here. We're just going to go around the edge and just paint that edge in a little bit, just so it's not so obviously white. Okay, we have our tiles sanded to the degree that we want them sanded. And what we're going to do next now is put the border on the tiles so that we can pour the resin over the top when we're done doing the glitter resin on the center part. So you're going to need an extruder, and you want to use the biggest slit disc that you have. And we're going to put that black and gold mixture that we made earlier and extrude it out into strips that are 4 inches long. Now it's important here, or a little bit over 4 inches. It's important here that we use different strips rather than taking one strip and just wrapping it around, because that will cause rounded corners and it might not adhere as much and cause the resin to leak through your coaster. So we don't want to do that. So we're going to take 4 strips for each of these, and I'm going to use my black liquid Sculpey. And the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead on this edge, and it should be as smooth as you could get it. Sand it down, cut it down, or whatever you need to do to get that edge as flat as you can. And we're going to use the liquid clay and apply it to the edge here, and then put the strip on. I'm going to just put a pretty good amount around the edges. We want to make sure we have really good contact with our strip, because we don't want that resin to drip through there. And I'm going to put this down. Now I'm doing the outside 2, and I am placing the final 2 on the outside of that end, and I'm going to cut them flush. So these 2 sides are going to end with these 2 sides on the inside. There. Now I'm going to cut that flush with the outside edge there. Cut that one flush with the outside edge there. And now we're going to bake it. And now I'm going to show you why this outline isn't quite so important, although having the guidelines is. I am using Tiny Pandora ultra fine glitter, and I'm starting with the black. It comes with this handy dandy little spoon that you can just spoon some out, and I have some resin in here. And this UV resin, I am going to go ahead and put just a little bit, you really don't need much at all, in my glitter. And now we're going to paint the black outline of our pattern. I'm using a very fine brush, and we're just going to pick up a little bit of paint. Okay, I'm going to load my little tiny paintbrush up, not a lot, just a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and paint the outside of this black. Now you can see a little bit as I'm going around. I hope you can see it. So I have a good start on my outside edge. I'll be back for the next color. Okay, as you can see, I have added some gold to the black that I did, and now I have started another one also. And what I'm going to do next is the silver. And I have decided to use these colors because I wanted it to be kind of neutral. I don't have any goal in mind for where these are going to go. And if you wanted to do a resale or something, then you would have a neutral color palette is kind of what I'm trying to do. Black and gold and silver. And I'm also going to use some white glitter. I'm putting silver down now, and I'll be back when I'm closer to done. I'm done with putting all of the glitter on the pattern. As I said before, I took some creative license with this. And now what we're going to do, and we're almost done, we're going to turn it over and we're going to paint black paint just in about an inch or so on here, because our cork is going to cover most of the back. So I'm going to use just some acrylic paint and my handy dandy brush, and I'm going to paint the back. And now we're just going to brush this black on the back. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put the resin, and our resin is going to be put in here up to the level of the trim that we put on earlier. Now if you notice that your trim and your piece might not quite be even, this is a good time to just lay it flat upside down on a piece of sandpaper and just even it out like that. Because some of this did get a little warped when it cooked. It's not going to make a difference on the liquid of the resin because that levels it out. But you might want to just take and even up some of those points if it warped a little bit. Okay, I took these and I sanded off the points so that even though this might not be level with your edge, that doesn't matter. One of the reasons I love this project is some of the products that we're working with are very forgiving, and resin is one of those things. Once you get that resin in there, you aren't going to be able to see that this isn't completely even in here. So I have the tops of this sanded down, even though the bottom has a little bit of a curve in it. The top does not. So I'm just going to take a damp cloth and wipe away all of the stuff that dust we created when we sanded. I'm going to be using a 2-part resin, which is going to require us to use a scale because it is 50% of the base and 50% of the hardener. I use my resin in gallons. These are, it's a half-gallon container that comes with a half-gallon of each, part B and part A, they call it. And that's because I do a lot of painting with my resin. And we're going to use a cup. And I'm going to reset my camera. My resin is nice and clear and has some bubbles in it, but I'll tell you how to deal with that later. So right now I am just going to start pouring my resin in the cup here, or in the coaster, sorry. And I'm going to let that even out for just a little bit. And then we're going to come back and touch these up. It's really important that you push that resin into the corners. And now you can see why I had you make sure that you sealed those edges with that liquid polymer clay. Because if those edges aren't sealed, this resin is just going to leak right through that edge there. We're going to be adding more resin, and we're also going to be adding some holographic glitter. So, okay, I probably have these about 2/3 full of their resin that's going to go in them. What I'm going to do now is I decided to use silver holographic glitter because I put a lot of gold in here. So I want to bring some of the silver back out. And what I'm going to do is sprinkle just a little bit around the edges, not over the center, not much at all. So I ended up with a nice resin finish that is right up to the top of all of my pieces. Now that we're done with the resin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint these edges, or finish these edges, and I'm going to finish it with my Varathane polyurethane, the water-based one. And this is an excellent sealer for those edges. So I'm going to do that next. In addition to painting the top edge and the side, I am also painting with the Varathane on the back all the way out to the edge and sealing that. Not much of that is going to show when we put the cork on the back, but I just want it to be tough. It's going to be picked up and handled a lot. So I'm actually going to be putting 2 coats of my Varathane on everything. 2 coats on the outside edge here and on the edge on the back. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put the cork on the back of these. I have a roll of cork here that I bought at a craft store, and it has measurements on the back that you can use for a guide. But because our coasters are handmade and not perfectly even, as you can see, they're not all exactly the same measurements, and the sides aren't all totally straight. So what I did was I numbered my coasters on back. You probably can't see it. This one is a 3. And I traced them out on the back of the paper, and I put the corresponding number on the square that has the number on the back of this. Now what you have to do, because we want the cork to be just a little bit smaller than the edge, we're going to want a little bit of that edge to show, is when I cut the cork, I cut it just a little bit to the inside of that line so that our cork bottom does not really show on the edge of the coaster when we apply it. I am going to take the one that I marked number 1 and cut out, and this is self-adhesive, but I don't really trust that it will work that well. So what I do is, in addition to using the adhesive from the back of this, I'm going to take some Elmer's rubber cement, and I am going to sort of liberally apply some to the back here so that that cork really does stick, because again, we have an uneven surface here, and we just want to make sure everything that's on here sticks for you. And now I'm going to take this, and because I cut the edges in a little bit smaller, we need to center it, but the rubber cement is also going to help with that. And what I'm going to do now is put some weight on top of it until it dries. I use books, and I need to clean up any rubber cement that might have come out of the side. We're going to push that down real well. Use a brayer if you have one. And I'm going to clean up anything that comes out of the sides. Looking at the side also lets you know if you got the glue all the way out to the edges. That's really important. And if you have to move it around to get some glue where there isn't any, that works well too with this rubber cement. It takes a while to dry. And we're done. Here are the resin, polymer clay, and glitter totally new transfer coasters. I hope you liked them. I hope you have as much fun as I did putting them together. Thank you for watching, and come back again.